Okay, finishing up chapter 4, 4-8, day 2. We're going to do the implicit differentiating again, but with trig functions, a little bit more involved in the algebra. So we're just going to jump right into the examples. So example 1, we've got sine of xy equals 2x. So definitely not a y equals equation, so we'll do it implicitly. On the left, we've got a trig function with an angle, and the angle you can see is a product rule. So the outside function, though, is the trig function. So derivative of sine is cosine of the angle. You never change the angle. But now I've got to multiply by the derivative of the inside, and here's where my chain rule comes into play, or my product rule. So product rule has two parts, so I'm going to need brackets here, because it's the outside times the whole inside, which has two parts. So derivative of the first term is 1, multiply by the second, plus, keep the first, times by the derivative of the second, which is 1, and it's a y, so then I need the y prime. See how I needed the brackets here? Otherwise, it would have just been the cosine of xy times y without a bracket plus this. So because the inside derivative had two parts, I needed brackets. When I'm at the equals, derivative of 2x is a 2. Okay, I can ignore the ones in here. I need to isolate the y prime. The y prime is trapped inside of these brackets. So in order to get rid of the brackets, we have to distribute first, and then we can solve for the y prime. So the cosine of xy, this will be times y. I'm going to bring that y to the front so it doesn't get confused with the angle. So we're distributing here. It's y times the cosine of xy plus, I've got the x and the y prime times that. So x times the cosine of xy times the y prime equals 2. So the only y prime I have is sitting here, so I need to kick this whole term over to the other side by subtracting it. That will leave this one term, x cosine of xy times y prime equals 2 minus y cosine of xy. Okay, solving for the y prime, I need to get rid of what's multiplied by it. So I have to divide by these two terms here, the x cosine of xy. So those cancel. You're left with the y prime equals what we had there, 2. Nothing simplifies. Don't get cancel happy with the cosine of xy's because it is holding hands over here with the 2. So do not cancel those. It's holding hands there. Can't get rid of it. Okay, so a little bit more involved. Let's keep working. Cosine of x minus y equals y cosine of x. Okay, on the left, we've got two y terms, so we should have two y primes in the end. But here I've got a trig function with an angle, and here I've got a y term times an x term. Hopefully you would recognize that to be your product rule. So we'll start on the left, though. It's a trig function. Derivative of cosine is negative sine of the angle. Don't change it. Times the derivative of the angle. And the angle has two parts to it, so that's why I know I put the brackets down. So inside derivative of x is 1 minus the derivative of y is 1, but I've got to multiply by y prime. So I don't need the 1 there, but I just like to put it down. This 1 was absolutely needed because of the minus in here. It wasn't being multiplied by anything. So I did need to put it down because it was being subtracted. I needed something in that basket there. Over here, I'm going to do product rule with the u and the v. Product rule says take the derivative of this term, which is 1, and it's a y, so I got to remember to multiply by the y prime. times, oops, not equals, times by the second term, cosine x, plus, keep the first term, times by the derivative of the second. Derivative of cosine is a negative sine of x, and then the derivative of x is 1. Not that I need that one because it's being multiplied. So now, when I look for my y primes, I've got one here, which is just by itself in a basket, and then I've got one trapped inside the parentheses. So the first thing I'm going to have to do is get rid of these parentheses, then I'll get y prime terms isolated on one side. So I've got this negative sine of xy that's going to get distributed to the 1 and to the y prime. So when I multiply by 1, nothing changes. Now I've got a negative sign times this minus y prime. That's going to be plus sine of x minus y times y prime. Here I've got y prime times the cosine of x. Then I'll have a minus y times the sine of x. Okay. Now I've got to, I have to get my y primes on one side, isolate them before I can factor. So I'm going to bring this y prime term over to the left. This one doesn't have a y prime term, so I'm going to kick that to the right, all at the same time. So I'm going to subtract this basket, bring it over here. I'm going to add this one to cancel it out. So I'll add it to the other side. So these are gone. I have this basket and this basket here. So sine of x minus y times y prime minus the y prime cosine of x. These are gone. I have the negative y sine x plus sine of x minus y. Okay, I've isolated my y prime terms. Now I have to factor the y prime term out of the two baskets so that I have just one y prime term instead of two. So see the two baskets. We're only going to take out the y prime because that's what I want to solve for. So taking out the y prime leaves sine of x minus y minus cosine of x equals this. Now I have to divide to get the y prime term by itself. I got to divide by this quantity here. Sine of x minus y minus cosine of x. Divide by the same thing over here. Cosine of x. Nothing's going to cancel. And those will go away. So y prime equals this fraction here. Call that good. Okay. Next, all they're going to do is just get more involved in the algebra. Xy equals tangent of x times y. So I definitely see a product rule on the left, and I see a trig function with a product rule on the right. So you got two product rules that are going to happen here. It's going to give us a lot of y prime terms. So we'll start. Think of this as your u, the y as your v, and we're ready for product rule. So derivative of x is 1 times by the y plus keep the x. Derivative of y is 1 times y prime. On the right, the outside function is the trig function. Tangent's derivative is secant squared. Keep the angle the same. Times by the derivative of the angle, which is a product rule. Your u and your v again. so you need brackets here because there's going to be two parts to the derivative. So x times, oh, it's the same derivative I got over here, but we'll go through it. Derivative of x is 1 times by the y plus x times derivative of y is 1 times the y prime. Okay, I know I need to distribute when I have these brackets because the y prime term is trapped inside of there. So this side I'll just simplify to y plus xy prime, distributing the secant squared of xy. That y is like a multiplier that goes in the front. And now again, oops, times this whole thing. That will be plus x y prime secant of xy. Okay, now I've got to isolate the y prime terms. There's a y prime here and here. I want those on the left. Anything that doesn't have a y prime I want on the right. So this term here has to get kicked to the right. This one's got to come back to the left. So I'm going to subtract xy prime secant of xy from both sides. Well, that kind of ran into my spot. I want to subtract this y term here because it doesn't have a y prime on it. Anything without a y prime goes to the right. So I'm going to subtract y from this side of the equation. Let's put it underneath here. And I'm going to subtract y over here. So doing that, my y's cancel because I subtracted it. I've got this, negative x y prime secant of xy here plus xy prime. These are gone. I've got y secant squared xy minus y. Okay, isolated my y prime terms on the left. Now you solve for y prime by factoring, because you've got two baskets here because of the add sign in the middle. You've got this first basket plus the second basket, and all we want to take out is the y prime. Even though they both have an x, I don't care about that. I want to solve for y prime. So take out the y prime. What's left in the first basket will be the negative x times the secant of xy plus x equals, and then here, y secant squared xy minus y. Now I'm ready to divide. Negative x secant xy plus x. Divide by the same thing here. Negative x secant xy plus x. Y prime equals. Okay, if I showed you the answer to this, you'd say, well, I didn't get that, because the answer is actually a negative y over x. And where that's coming from is simplifying. If you look in the top here, you see two baskets. And both baskets have that y in common. I'm going to take a y out of the top two baskets. In the bottom, you see both baskets, and there's an x that you can take out of both of them. And if we do that, oh, I lost a squared somewhere. Oh, right here, when I did the subtract, oh no. This one. Oh, I lost it right here, secant squared. When I distribute, that was supposed to be secant squared, secant squared, secant squared, secant squared, secant squared, secant squared. Oh yeah, that wasn't going to work.